Deborah Lynn. The Pickwick Papers by Charles Dickens. Chapter 52. Involving a serious change in the Weller family and the untimely downfall of Mr. Stiggins.
Considering it a matter of delicacy to abstain from introducing either Bob Sawyer or Ben Allen to the young couple until they were fully prepared to expect them, and wishing to spare Arabella's feelings as much as possible, Mr. Pickwick proposed that he and Sam should alight in the neighbourhood of the George and Vulture, and that the two young men should, for the present, take up their quarters elsewhere. To this they very readily agreed, and the proposition was accordingly acted upon. Mr. Ben Allen and Mr. Bob Sawyer betaking themselves to a sequestered pot-shop on the remotest confines of the borough, behind the bar door of which their names had, in other days, very often appeared at the head of long and complex calculations worked in white chalk. "Dear me, Mr. Weller," said the pretty housemaid, meeting Sam at the door. "Dear me, I wish it was, my dear," replied Sam, dropping behind to let his master get out of hearing. "What a sweet-looking creetur you are, Mary." "Lot, Mr. Weller, what nonsense you do talk," said Mary. "Oh, don't, Mr. Weller." "Don't what, my dear?" said Sam. "Why, that," replied the pretty housemaid. "Lord, do get along with you." Thus admonishing him, the pretty housemaid pushed Sam against the wall, declaring that he had tumbled her cap, and put her hair quite out of curl. "And prevented what I was going to say besides," added Mary. "There's a letter been waiting here for you 4 days. You hadn't gone away half an hour when it came, and more than that, it's got immediate on the outside." "There is it, my love?" inquired Sam. "I took care of it for you, or I dare say it would have been lost long before this," replied Mary. "There, take it. It's more than you deserve." With these words, after many pretty little coquettish doubts and fears and wishes that she might not have lost it, Mary produced the letter from behind the nicest little muslin tucker possible, and handed it to Sam, who thereupon kissed it with much gallantry and devotion. "My goodness me," said Mary, adjusting the tucker and feigning unconsciousness, "you seem to have grown very fond of it all at once." To this Mr. Weller only replied by a wink, the intense meaning of which no description could convey the faintest idea of, and sitting himself down beside Mary on a window-seat, opened the letter and glanced at the contents. "Hullo!" exclaimed Sam. "What's all this?" "Nothing the matter, I hope," said Mary, peeping over his shoulder. "Bless them eyes o' yourn," said Sam, looking up. "Never mind my eyes. You had much better read your letter," said the pretty housemaid, and as she said so, she made the eyes twinkle with such slyness and beauty that they were perfectly irresistible. Sam refreshed himself with a kiss, and read as follows: "Marcus Granby, Dorkin, Wednesday. My dear Samuel, I am wery sorry to have the pleasure of being a bearer of ill news. Your mother-in-law caught cold consequence of imprudently setting too long on the damp grass in the rain, a hearing of a shepherd who warn't able to leave off till late at night, owing to his having bound hisself up with brandy and water, and not being able to stop hisself till he got a little sober, which took a many hours to do. The doctor says that if she'd swallowed vorm brandy and vater arterwards instead of afore, she mightn't have been no vus. Her veals was immediately greased, and everythink done to set her a-goin as could be inwented. Your father had hopes as she vould have worked round as usual, but just as she was a-turnin' the corner, my boy, she took the wrong road and went downhill with a velocity you never see, and notwithstanding that the drag was put on directly by the medical man, it warn't of no use at all, for she paid the last pike at 20 minutes afore 6 o'clock yesterday evening, having done the journey wery much under the reg'lar time, which p'raps was partly owing to her having taken in wery little luggage. By the way, your father says that if you will come and see me, Sammy, he will take it as a wery great favour, for I am wery lonely, Samivel, N.B. he will have it spelt that way, which I say ain't right, and as there is sich a many things to settle, he is sure your governor won't object. Of course he will not, Sammy, for I knows him better, so he sends his duty, in which I join, and am Samoville, infernally yours, Tony Veller. What a incomprehensible letter, said Sam. Who's to know what it means, with all this he-ing and I-ing? It ain't my father's writin', 'cept this here signature and print letters, that's his. Perhaps he got somebody to write it for him and signed it himself afterwards, said the pretty housemaid. Stop a minute, replied Sam, running over the letter again and pausing here and there to reflect as he did so. You've hit it. The gentleman as wrote it was a-tellin' all about the misfortin in a proper vay, and then my father comes a-lookin' over him and complicates the whole concern by puttin' his oar in. That's just the wery sort of thing he'd do. You're right, Mary, my dear. Having satisfied himself on this point, Sam read the letter all over once more, and appearing to form a clear notion of its contents for the first time, ejaculated thoughtfully as he folded it up. And so the poor creetur's dead. I'm sorry for it. She warn't a bad disposed 'ooman, if them shepherds had let her alone. I'm wery sorry for it. Mr. Weller uttered these words in so serious a manner that the pretty housemaid cast down her eyes and looked very grave. Howsever, said Sam, putting the letter in his pocket with a gentle sigh, it was to be, and was, as the old lady said arter she'd married the footman. Can't be helped now, can it, Mary? Mary shook her head and sighed too. I must apply to the Hemperor for leave of absence, said Sam. Mary sighed again. The letter was so very affecting. Good-bye, said Sam. Good-bye, rejoined the pretty housemaid, turning her head away. Well, shake hands, won't you? said Sam. The pretty housemaid put out a hand, which, although it was a housemaid's, was a very small one, and rose to go. I shan't be wery long away, said Sam. You're always away, said Mary, giving her head the slightest possible toss in the air. You no sooner come, Mr. Weller, than you go again. Mr. Weller drew the household beauty closer to him, and entered upon a whispering conversation which had not proceeded far, when she turned her face round and condescended to look at him again. When they parted, it was somehow or other indispensably necessary for her to go to her room and arrange the cap and curls before she could think of presenting herself to her mistress, which preparatory ceremony she went off to perform, bestowing many nods and smiles on Sam over the banisters as she tripped upstairs. I shan't be away more than a day or two, sir, at the furthest, said Sam, when he had communicated to Mr. Pickwick the intelligence of his father's loss. As long as may be necessary, Sam, replied Mr. Pickwick. You have my full permission to remain. Sam bowed. You will tell your father, Sam, that if I can be of any assistance to him in his present situation, I shall be most willing and ready to lend him any aid in my power, said Mr. Pickwick. Thank you, sir, rejoined Sam. I'll mention it, sir. And with some expressions of mutual goodwill and interest, master and man separated. It was just 7 o'clock when Samuel Weller, alighting from the box of a stage-coach which passed through Dorking, stood within a few hundred yards of the Marquis of Granby. It was a cold, dull evening. The little street looked dreary and dismal, and the mahogany countenance of the noble and gallant Marquis seemed to wear a more sad and melancholy expression than it was wont to do, as it swung to and fro, creaking mournfully in the wind. The blinds were pulled down, and the shutters partly closed. Of the knot of loungers that usually collected about the door, not one was to be seen. The place was silent and desolate. Seeing nobody of whom he could ask any preliminary questions, Sam walked softly in, and glancing round, he quickly recognized his parent in the distance. The widower was seated at a small round table in the little room behind the bar, smoking a pipe, with his eyes intently fixed upon the fire. The funeral had evidently taken place that day, for attached to his hat, which he still retained on his head, was a hatband measuring about 1.5 yards in length, which hung over the top rail of the chair and streamed negligently down. Mr. Weller was in a very abstracted and contemplative mood. Notwithstanding that Sam called him by name several times, he still continued to smoke with the same fixed and quiet countenance, and was only roused ultimately by his son's placing the palm of his hand on his shoulder. "Sammy," said Mr. Weller, "you're welcome." "I've been a-calling to you half a dozen times," said Sam, hanging his hat on a peg, "but you didn't hear me." "No, Sammy," replied Mr. Weller, again looking thoughtfully at the fire. "I was in a referee, Sammy." "What about?" inquired Sam, drawing his chair up to the fire. "In a referee, Sammy," replied the elder Mr. Weller, "regarding her, Samivel." Here Mr. Weller jerked his head in the direction of Dorking churchyard, in mute explanation that his words referred to the late Mrs. Weller. "I was a-thinking, Sammy," said Mr. Weller, eyeing his son with great earnestness over his pipe, as if to assure him that however extraordinary and incredible the declaration might appear, it was nevertheless calmly and deliberately uttered. "I was a-thinking, Sammy, that upon the whole I was wery sorry she was gone." "Vell, and so you ought to be," replied Sam. Mr. Weller nodded his acquiescence in the sentiment, and again fastening his eyes on the fire, shrouded himself in a cloud, and mused deeply. "Those was wery sensible observations as she made, Sammy," said Mr. Weller, driving the smoke away with his hand after a long silence. "What observations?" inquired Sam. "Them as she made arter she was took ill," replied the old gentleman. "What was they?" "Somethin' to this here effect. 'Veller,' she says, 'I'm afeard I've not done by you quite what I ought to have done. You're a wery kind-hearted man, and I might ha' made your home more comfortabler. I begin to see now,' she says, 'that it's too late; that if a married 'ooman vishes to be religious, she should begin with discharging her duties at home, and making them as is about her cheerful and happy, and that while she goes to church or chapel or what not, at all proper times, she should be wery careful not to conwert this sort of thing into a excuse for idleness or self-indulgence. I have done this,' she says, 'and I've vasted time and substance on them as has done it more than me. But I hope when I'm gone, Veller, that you'll think on me as I was afore I knowed them people, and as I really was by nature.' Susan, says I was took up wery short by this, Samivel. I won't deny it, my boy. 'Susan,' I says, 'you've been a wery good wife to me altogether. Don't say nothin' at all about it. Keep a good heart, my dear, and you'll live to see me punch that 'ere Stiggins's head yet.'" "She smiled at this, Samivel," said the old gentleman, stifling a sigh with his pipe, "but she died arter all." "Vell," said Sam, venturing to offer a little homely consolation, after the lapse of 3 or 4 minutes, consumed by the old gentleman in slowly shaking his head from side to side and solemnly smoking, "Vell, guv'nor, we must all come to it one day or another." "So we must, Sammy," said Mr. Weller the elder. "There's a providence in it all," said Sam. "O' course there is," replied his father, with a nod of grave approval. "What'd become of the undertakers without it, Sammy?" Lost in the immense field of conjecture opened by this reflection, the elder Mr. Weller laid his pipe on the table and stirred the fire with a meditative visage. While the old gentleman was thus engaged, a very buxom-looking cook, dressed in mourning, who had been bustling about in the bar, glided into the room, and bestowing many smirks of recognition upon Sam, silently stationed herself at the back of his father's chair, and announced her presence by a slight cough, the which, being disregarded, was followed by a louder one. "Hullo!" said the elder Mr. Weller, dropping the poker as he looked round, and hastily drew his chair away. "What's the matter now?" "Have a cup of tea, there's a good soul," replied the buxom female coaxingly. "I won't," replied Mr. Weller in a somewhat boisterous manner. "I'll see you—" Mr. Weller hastily checked himself, and added in a low tone, "furder fust." "Oh, dear, dear, how adversity does change people!" said the lady, looking upwards. "It's the only thing twixt this and the doctor as shall change my condition," muttered Mr. Weller. "I really never saw a man so cross," said the buxom female. "Never mind, it's all for my own good, vich is the reflection with vich the penitent schoolboy comforted his feelin's ven they flogged him," rejoined the old gentleman. The buxom female shook her head with a compassionate and sympathizing air, and appealing to Sam, inquired whether his father really ought not to make an effort to keep up, and not give way to that lowness of spirits. "You see, Mr. Samuel," said the buxom female, "as I was telling him yesterday, he will feel lonely. He can't expect but what he should, sir, but he should keep up a good heart, because, dear me, I'm sure we all pity his loss, and are ready to do anything for him, and there's no situation in life so bad, Mr. Samuel, that it can't be mended, which is what a very worthy person said to me when my husband died." Here the speaker, putting her hand before her mouth, coughed again, and looked affectionately at the elder Mr. Weller. "As I don't require any o' your conversation just now, mum, will you have the goodness to retire?" inquired Mr. Weller, in a grave and steady voice. "Well, Mr. Weller," said the buxom female, "I'm sure I only spoke to you out of kindness." "Wery likely, mum," replied Mr. Weller. "Samivel, show the lady out, and shut the door after her." This hint was not lost upon the buxom female, for she at once left the room and slammed the door behind her, upon which Mr. Weller senior, falling back in his chair in a violent perspiration, said, "Sammy, if I was to stop here alone 1 week, only 1 week, my boy, that 'ere 'ooman 'ud marry me by force and wiolence afore it was over." "What, is she so wery fond on you?" inquired Sam. "Fond?" replied his father. "I can't keep her avay from me. If I was locked up in a fireproof chest with a patent Brahmin, she'd find means to get at me, Sammy." "What a thing it is to be so sought arter," observed Sam, smiling. "I don't take no pride out'n it, Sammy," replied Mr. Weller, poking the fire vehemently. "It's a horrid sitowation. I'm actually drove out of house and home by it. The breath was scarcely out of your poor mother-in-law's body, then one old 'ooman sends me a pot of jam, and another a pot of jelly, and another brews a blessed large jug of chamomile tea, which she brings in with her own hands." Mr. Weller paused with an aspect of intense disgust, and looking round, added in a whisper, "They was all widders, Sammy, all on 'em, 'cept the chamomile tea one, as was a single young lady of 53. Sam gave a comical look in reply, and the old gentleman, having broken an obstinate lump of coal, with a countenance expressive of as much earnestness and malice as if it had been the head of one of the widows last mentioned, said, "In short, Sammy, I feel that I ain't safe anyveres but on the box." "How are you safer there than anyveres else?" interrupted Sam. "'Cause a coachman's a privileged individual," replied Mr. Weller, looking fixedly at his son. "'Cause a coachman may do without suspicion what other men may not. 'Cause a coachman may be on the wery amicablest terms with 80 mile of females, and yet nobody think that he ever means to marry any one among 'em, and what other man can say the same, Sammy?" "Vell, there's something in that," said Sam. "If your governor had been a coachman," reasoned Mr. Weller, "do you s'pose as that 'ere jury 'ud ever ha' conwicted him? Supposin' it possible as the matter could ha' gone to that extremity, they dustn't ha' done it." "Why not?" said Sam, rather disparagingly. "Why not?" rejoined Mr. Weller. "'Cause it 'ud ha' gone agin their consciences. A reg'lar coachman's a sort of connectin' link betwixt singleness and matrimony, and every practicable man knows it." "What! You mean they're general favourites, and nobody takes adwantage on 'em, p'raps?" said Sam. His father nodded. "How it ever come to that 'ere pass," resumed the parent Weller, "I can't say. Why it is that long stage coachmen possess such insinuations, and is alvays looked up to, adored, I may say, by every young 'ooman in every town he works through, I don't know. I only know that so it is. It's a regulation of nature, a dispensary, as your poor mother-in-law used to say." "A dispensation," said Sam, correcting the old gentleman. "Wery good, Samivel. A dispensation, if you like it better," returned Mr. Weller. "I call it a dispensary, and it's always writ up so at the places where they gives you physic for nothin' in your own bottles, that's all." With these words Mr. Weller refilled and relighted his pipe, and once more summoning up a meditative expression of countenance, continued as follows: "Therefore, my boy, as I do not see the advisability o' stoppin' here to be married whether I want to or not, and as at the same time I do not vish to separate myself from them interested members of society altogether, I have come to the determination o' drivin' the safety and puttin' up once more at the Bell Savage, which is my natural born element, Sammy." "And what's to become of the business?" inquired Sam. "The business, Samivel," replied the old gentleman, "goodwill, stock, and fixtures will be sold by private contract, and out of the money £200, agreeable to a request of your mother-in-law's to me, a little afore she died, will be invested in your name in— what do you call them things agin?" "What things?" inquired Sam. "Them things as is always a goin' up and down in the city." "Omnibuses?" suggested Sam. "Nonsense," replied Mr. Weller. "Them things as is alvays a fluctuatin' and gettin' theirselves inwolved somehow or another with the national debt and the Checkers bill and all that." "Oh, the funds," said Sam. "Ah," rejoined Mr. Weller, "the funds. £200 of the money is to be inwested for you, Samivel, in the funds, 4.5%, reduced counsels, Sammy." "Wery kind of the old lady to think of me," said Sam, "and I'm wery much obliged to her." "The rest will be inwested in my name," continued the elder Mr. Weller, "and when I'm took off the road it'll come to you, so take care you don't spend it all at once, my boy, and mind that no widder gets a inklin' of your fortin or you're done." Having delivered this warning, Mr. Weller resumed his pipe with a more serene countenance, the disclosure of these matters appearing to have eased his mind considerably. "Somebody's a-tappin' at the door," said Sam. "Let 'em tap," replied his father with dignity. Sam acted upon the direction. There was another tap, and another, and then a long row of taps, upon which Sam inquired why the tapper was not admitted. "Hush!" whispered Mr. Weller with apprehensive looks. "Don't take no notice on 'em, Sammy. It's one of the widders, p'raps." No notice being taken of the taps, the unseen visitor, after a short lapse, ventured to open the door and peep in. It was no female head that was thrust in at the partially opened door, but the long black locks and red face of Mr. Stiggins. Mr. Weller's pipe fell from his hands. The reverend gentleman gradually opened the door by almost imperceptible degrees, until the aperture was just wide enough to admit of the passage of his lank body, when he glided into the room and closed it after him with great care and gentleness. Turning towards Sam, and raising his hands and eyes in token of the unspeakable sorrow with which he regarded the calamity that had befallen the family, he carried the high-backed chair to his old corner by the fire, and, seating himself on the very edge, drew forth a brown pocket-handkerchief and applied the same to his optics. While this was going forward, the elder Mr. Weller sat back in his chair with his eyes wide open, his hands planted on his knees, and his whole countenance expressive of absorbing and overwhelming astonishment. Sam sat opposite him in perfect silence, waiting with eager curiosity for the termination of the scene. Mr. Stiggins kept the brown pocket-handkerchief before his eyes for some minutes, moaning decently meanwhile, and then, mastering his feelings by a strong effort, put it in his pocket and buttoned it up. After this he stirred the fire. After that he rubbed his hands and looked at Sam. "Oh, my young friend," said Mr. Stiggins, breaking the silence in a very low voice, "here's a sorrowful affliction." Sam nodded very slightly. "For the man of wrath, too," added Mr. Stiggins. "It makes a vessel's heart bleed." Mr. Weller was overheard by his son to murmur something relative to making a vessel's nose bleed, but Mr. Stiggins heard him not. "Do you know, young man," whispered Mr. Stiggins, drawing his chair closer to Sam, "whether she has left Emmanuel anything?" "Who's he?" inquired Sam. "The chapel," replied Mr. Stiggins. "Our chapel, our fold, Mr. Samuel." "She hasn't left the fold nothin', nor the shepherd nothin', nor the animals nothin'," said Sam decisively, "nor the dogs neither." Mr. Stiggins looked slyly at Sam, glanced at the old gentleman, who was sitting with his eyes closed as if asleep, and drawing his chair still nearer, said, "Nothing for me, Mr. Samuel?" Sam shook his head. "I think there's something," said Stiggins, turning as pale as he could turn. "Consider, Mr. Samuel. No little token?" "Not so much as the birth of that 'ere old umbrella o' yourn," replied Sam. "Perhaps," said Mr. Stiggins hesitatingly, after a few moments' deep thought, "perhaps she recommended me to the care of the man of wrath, Mr. Samuel?" "I think that's wery likely from what he said," rejoined Sam. "He was a-speaking about you just now." "Was he, though?" exclaimed Stiggins, brightening up. "Ah, he's changed, I dare say. We might live very comfortably together now, Mr. Samuel, eh? I could take care of his property when you are away. Good care, you see." Heaving a long-drawn sigh, Mr. Stiggins paused for a response. Sam nodded, and Mr. Weller the elder gave vent to an extraordinary sound which, being neither a groan nor a grunt, nor a gasp nor a growl, seemed to partake in some degree of the character of all four. Mr. Stiggins, encouraged by this sound, which he understood to betoken remorse or repentance, looked about him, rubbed his hands, wept, smiled, wept again, and then, walking softly across the room to a well-remembered shelf in one corner, took down a tumbler, and with great deliberation put 4 lumps of sugar in it. Having got thus far, he looked about him again and sighed grievously. With that, he walked softly into the bar, and presently returning with the tumbler half full of pineapple rum, advanced to the kettle, which was singing gaily on the hob, mixed his grog, stirred it, sipped it, sat down, and taking a long and hearty pull at the rum and water, stopped for breath. The elder Mr. Weller, who still continued to make various strange and uncouth attempts to appear asleep, offered not a single word during these proceedings, but when Stiggins stopped for breath, he darted upon him, and snatching the tumbler from his hand, threw the remainder of the rum and water in his face, and the glass itself into the grate. Then, seizing the reverend gentleman firmly by the collar, he suddenly fell to kicking him most furiously, accompanying every application of his top boot to Mr. Stiggins's person with sundry violent and incoherent anathemas upon his limbs, eyes, and body. "Sammy," said Mr. Weller, "put my hat on tight for me." Sam dutifully adjusted the hat with a long hatband more firmly on his father's head, and the old gentleman, resuming his kicking with greater agility than before, tumbled with Mr. Stiggins through the bar and through the passage, out at the front door, and so into the street, the kicking continuing the whole way, and increasing in vehemence rather than diminishing every time the top boot was lifted. It was a beautiful and exhilarating sight to see the red-nosed man writhing in Mr. Weller's grasp, and his whole frame quivering with anguish as kick followed kick in rapid succession. It was a still more exciting spectacle to behold Mr. Weller, after a powerful struggle, immersing Mr. Stiggins's head in a horse trough full of water, and holding it there until he was half suffocated. "There," said Mr. Weller, throwing all his energy into one most complicated kick, as he at length permitted Mr. Stiggins to withdraw his head from the trough. "Send any vun of them lazy shepherds here, and I'll pound him to a jelly first, and drown him arterwards. Sammy, help me in and fill me a small glass of brandy. I'm out of breath, my boy." Chapter 52